living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Hello, friends. It's Dr. Carol, and this is Relationship Prescriptions. If you're married, have you ever wanted so badly to say something to your husband or wife? Maybe you were waiting until you could talk to them, or you called them on the phone and there was just something so important to you. And then when you tried to say it, everything just fell flat. Maybe your husband or wife was distracted and they didn't hear you. Maybe the way that you said it came across so wrong that it ended up making them upset and they just completely cut you off and shut you out. And the communication experience was just a flop. Well, sadly, that happens to so many couples, but it doesn't have to be that way. You know, you and I grow up learning to communicate, or more realistically, we learn methods of talking, not talking, sharing information, not sharing information that may either help or hurt when we enter into an adult relationship ourselves. None of us, I don't believe there's any human being that enters into marriage truly understanding how to get the best results from communication. I certainly didn't. I got married when I was in my 40s. I had never been married before. I had all these years of singleness. I was an adult. I was a professional. I frankly wasn't looking. And when God brought my husband, Al, into my life, it was a wonderful miracle and a blessing. But even as an adult, I didn't understand everything I needed to know about communicating with my husband, as well as other things. But that learning to communicate, especially with one person, your spouse, takes skill. It takes learning. It doesn't happen automatically. The patterns that your family of origin taught you about communicating, even if they were healthy, may not be the patterns that are most effective between you and your spouse now as an adult. And certainly many, if not perhaps the majority of us, learned unhealthy ways of communicating even before we knew that we were learning. It just got built into us. And for all of those reasons and more, communicating with your spouse can be a challenge. Now, before I got married, again, I was in my 40s, mid to late 40s when God brought Al into my life. Before I got married, I studied about marriage. Of course, I had seen other married couples, and I was a physician and I'd gone through theology training, but I knew that there were things about marriage that I didn't understand well enough to be successful. I still remember a program that I heard on the radio a couple years before I was married, and there was something that just burned this piece of advice into my mind, and I was so grateful because a few months later, when God did bring my husband into my life, these two pieces of advice became so important. And those two pieces of advice were, number one, study your spouse, and number two, stay on your knees. Those two pieces of advice I took to heart and made such a difference in my own successful, happy marriage, not without challenges, but it made a difference. And part of studying your spouse is one of the foundational pieces in learning how to communicate. Now, some months ago, we at Dr. Carol Ministries surveyed hundreds of couples, well over 500 couples, about how they graded their marriage and about the aspects of their marriage that they felt were good or that could use improvement. And by far and away, the number one thing couples wanted to be improved, that they felt they needed to be better in their marriage, was communication. 70% of couples felt they needed better communication in their marriage. the other factors that they wanted improved in their marriage were important, but not even close. Things like sex, things like spiritual connection, as important as those were, they didn't come close to ranking the importance of communication. What I want to do with you today is share 3 keys to make the communication in your marriage healthier, stronger, more effective. 3 keys to healthy communication in marriage. Number 1, start with your own heart. It makes all the difference in the world how you bring yourself to communicating with your spouse. If you have a closed heart that's bitter, that's wounded, that's angry, that's holding grudges, uh, that's coming from a place of lack, or whatever it may be, if your heart is closed in that kind of a framework, just about anything you say to your spouse is likely to be met with something that you don't want, whether it's defensiveness or anger or minimizing. You will not be an effective communicator in marriage if you start from a closed heart. On the other hand, if your heart is open, you have a much better chance of being effective in communicating. Now, communication is a two-way street. It's giving and receiving. You cannot control how your spouse receives or responds to your communication, but the way you begin with your heart makes all the difference in the world. If your heart is open, if you are coming from a place of calmness, of hope, of peace, of wanting to connect, your ability to generate a positive response in your spouse from your communication will be so much greater. You can guarantee that if you come across with demanding or defensiveness or blaming, that your spouse will be defensive and push back. On the other hand, if you come from a place of an open heart, wanting to connect, there is a very good chance that your spouse will respond in kind. Not a guarantee, but a much better chance that your spouse will respond in kind. So, in thinking about your own heart, a couple things to help you in understanding what may be going on in your own heart. Whatever the issue is that you want to communicate, maybe it's about frustration over money or lack of sex or desiring intimacy or wanting to plan something that you and your spouse would do together, or whatever it is that you need to communicate about. Spend some time thinking about what's going on in your own heart enough that you understand why it's important to you. What are the stakes as you see it in addressing whatever it is that you need to communicate about? Maybe it's parenting, maybe it's in-laws, maybe it's what to do for the holidays or whatever the issue you need to talk about. Understand what's important for you initially, and at least that gives you a foundation to stand on. If you are emotionally invested in that particular thing, let the emotions cool down enough before trying to communicate with your spouse. If you are riled up with anger, if you are bitter and hurt, if you are coming from a place of overwhelming hurt, let the emotional temperature in your own soul cool down. Now, when something is really, really important, the emotions may not go away completely. In other words, you may still feel emotionally invested in what you need to talk about, but let the temperature cool down. When you approach your spouse to communicate about something important, you want to be coming from a clear mind, not a mind that is so overwhelmed with emotional heat that you're not thinking and responding clearly. So let the emotional temperature cool down in your own soul. Think through what's important to you initially and why it matters to you. That's key number one. Start with your own heart. If you need to spend some time in prayer, first, do that. If you need to talk with a trusted friend to get some perspective, do that. Get your own heart in an open, relatively healthy place. You're not going to do this perfectly, but start with paying attention to your own heart. Then, key number two, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Now, that way of saying it isn't original with me. That actually started with Stephen Covey and his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but it is incredibly applicable to communication in marriage. If you immediately seek to get your spouse to understand your point of view, it's likely they will become defensive and you will not make the progress and be as effective as you need to be. An experience in my own marriage highlighted this. When my husband Al and I got married, he wanted the TV on at night. He had been sleeping with the TV on at night for years, and that was what he wanted to continue. I, on the other hand, was used to sleeping at night with no TV on, quiet, dark, no lights on in the room. Even the TV light seemed so much brighter to me. And there was some tension between us about what the environment in our bedroom at night would be like. We didn't fight about it, but there was some ongoing tension for quite a period of time after we got married. We occasionally would, say things to each other. If I woke up in the middle of the night and the TV was on and he was asleep, well, I'd turn it off. And sometimes vice versa, he'd turn it on. And it was an ongoing source of tension. Well, one morning in the kitchen, we got to the bottom of things. Now, for some time, Al had developed ongoing respiratory symptoms. He had COPD. And as his health became increasingly a factor for him, he became increasingly afraid of dying in his sleep. And having the TV on at night was a way where he could feel like he was still alive. He could rouse himself just enough to be aware of the TV, to see it or hear it, and okay, he was still here in this world, and he could relax and go on sleeping. I realized that the sound was the most disturbing to me, that I could position myself, if I so chose, where I couldn't actually see the TV itself. If there was no sound, I could relax enough to go to sleep. As we realized these things about each other, we both actually shed some tears over that. And for the remaining years of our marriage, we slept with the TV on and on mute. We compromised in the sense of we came to a solution. We understood each other. And as we came to understand the other, all the defensiveness, all the tension evaporated, and we could come together, support each other in finding a solution that actually brought us closer together. That is what can happen when you seek to understand before seeking to be understood. So, what does that look like when you have something real important that you need your spouse to understand? If you are planning a communication with your spouse, remember, step one, you've already looked at your own heart. You've already worked through enough of what is going on inside that now when you come to your spouse, you can focus on understanding them. It's obviously, if you're the one bringing up the topic, you're starting the conversation, but you start it in a way to try to understand them. For example, if this is about money, you might approach your spouse at an appropriate time and say something like, you know, honey, I've noticed that, you know, the charge cards, we're not following the way that we had decided to use our charge cards. We're spending money that we hadn't agreed to. And I'm getting concerned about that. I'd like to hear from you how you're feeling about how our money life is going, how that aspect of our marriage is. Let me understand what was important to you about these purchases, or how our budget discussions have gone. Let me understand how you see our life around money. And seeking to understand first will get you so much farther. So, key number one, start with your own heart. Key number two, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And key number three, speak your spouse's language. I think that the translation software like Google Translate, I think maybe they should make a man speak and a woman speak translation option, because women and men on average use use communication, use words for different purposes, different meanings. Even if you both grew up in similar cultures, just your purpose and the way you speak is different. And almost always, your spouse's background in what certain things mean, and I don't mean that cultures necessarily are so different that a specific word refers to something different or you don't know what a word means, but the meaning behind things is so totally different. That can come up around money, it can come up around sex, and this is kind of an overflow of seeking to understand before seeking to be understood. Just a couple differences between men and women in general that may help you understand a little more about how to speak your spouse's language. Men, in general, view words as conveying information from one person to another. Using feelings in communication for many men feels foreign. It feels very vulnerable. So as a wife, when you come to your husband with a lot of emotion and a lot of words, that can feel almost, in some emotional sense, even frightening to your husband. He's overwhelmed. He may not understand how to respond. He may, want to shut you down quickly and fix it, and he doesn't know how to help. So as a wife, if there is some information you need your husband to understand, say it relatively succinctly. If you need support from your husband and need him to hear you and listen and do not need him to fix it, tell him that. You may be giving him a great gift by explaining, honey, I need to talk with you. I need your support. I don't want you to do anything. I just need you to listen. And you are helping me when you listen. Is that okay? Just letting him know that he doesn't have to fix it, and how listening can actually help you. Being upfront about that can be so helpful to many husbands. Now, conversely, the average woman, on average, words are much more a way to connect, a way to foster relationship. Sure, the information may be important, but communication is a means of connection and relationship. For a woman, conveying words without much meaning can feel very superficial. So for you as a husband, if you try to communicate something to your wife without any feelings, to her, it may seem very superficial, like you're not really engaged. When you do not acknowledge her feelings, it can feel like you are minimizing how important something is to her. So, for you as a husband, it can be so helpful if you stretch yourself to pay attention to the emotional component of your wife's communication. Now, this may feel like a challenge to you, it may feel a bit foreign, but if you can stretch yourself to express some emotions to your wife and to listen to her feelings, and even if nothing else, just acknowledge to her that you hear how emotionally um, important this is to her, you will go a long way toward helping your wife feel understood and connected with her. Don't be distracted. It's almost certain your wife needs you to pay attention when she's expressing something that has emotional component for her. Look at her. Don't look at your phone or the TV. Turn off the TV. Look at her. Listen to what she's saying. And if you can't do anything else, just say, honey, I hear how important that is to you. That must feel really frustrating or upsetting or difficult. Is there some way I can help you? If that's all you feel like you can do, that will help her. So those are a couple aspects of speaking your spouse's language that can be very, very helpful. The longer you study your spouse, you will learn more of the intricacies of their language. And it's worth continuing to study your spouse. It was several years into my marriage when I realized that regularly my husband would make a somewhat summary statement about a group of people, a business challenge, something in our home, something in the political or religious world. He would make a statement, and I came to understand that he was actually at those times wanting my input. It was his way of inviting me to respond. If I saw it the same way, he incredibly wanted me to affirm that I had the same assessment, the same evaluation that he did. If I didn't, he was welcoming me to give a different perspective. He wanted my intellectual engagement and connection with him when he would assess something, say how he said it. He wanted me to give input. And it was a while before I came to understand that aspect of his language. And once I did and started to respond in those ways, it helped us again feel closer coming together. So again, those 3 keys to better marriage communication. Number 1, start with your own heart. Deal with the emotional content in your own heart before you dump it on your spouse. Don't dump. Get to an open heart yourself first before trying to communicate something important to your spouse. Number 2, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Seek to understand where your spouse is coming from around this particular issue. And then number 3, speak your spouse's language. Take the time to understand what this situation, what this phrase, what this topic, what it means to your spouse, and how to communicate in a language that means something to them. I hope these 3 keys have addressed something in your marriage in a way that can help you see some ways to step forward. Now, I am really excited to mention 2 resources around marriage communication that I know will be helpful for you. The first resource is my book, Dr. Carol's Guide to Healthy Communication in Marriage. We'll put the link to that in the show notes. We have that available both as an ebook or as a physical book if you would actually prefer the physical book. Now, the good part about this healthy communication guide is that it comes with a number of follow-up practical ways to put it into practice in your marriage. Now, the book goes into more depth than I've been able to talk about here in a lot more expanded fashion. We give you some worksheets about how actually to address challenging topics with your spouse. And then we have an 8-week follow-up email communication challenge, each week giving you some practical steps to implement having a communication time with your husband or wife that is effective. We give you some worksheets about talking around the tough topics: marriage, sex, blended families. How do you talk about those emotionally charged things? We give you some practical worksheets to actually help you have those important conversations. So, Dr. Carol's Guide to Healthy Communication in Marriage. And then, number 2, our Fully Alive Group online community. Each month in the Fully Alive Group, we address one area of life, one broad topic that can be a challenge in our lives, in the body of Christ, just as people. We've talked about things such as anxiety and depression. We've talked about physical health. We've talked about sex and sexuality. For the month of October, starting tomorrow, if you're hearing this when it first comes out, the month of October, we're talking about marriage and marriage challenges. This first week, we are addressing in more depth marriage communication. If you are not yet a member of the Fully Alive Group, this is the time to join. I'm telling you, friends, this is such an encouraging online community. We have premium content for you, video teaching from me, live question and answer sessions, expert guests addressing some of the challenges that it may be difficult to get the kind of help that you need in your church each week or whatever. Some really, really premium help. I love the question and answer capabilities that we have in the Fully Alive Group. In particular, I come each week into the Fully Alive Group with video connection for you to give you help in these areas. I respond to your questions. And again, this month we're focusing on marriage, and October 1st, tonight, if you're listening to this when it first comes out, October 1st, we are addressing marriage communication. So I hope you're listening to this right away when it comes out, and that you register to be a member of the Fully Alive Group. It's only $20 a month. You won't find this kind of premium content anywhere else for this low of a price. And the ability to connect with me one-on-one, there is just so much goodness in addressing these challenges. So fullyalivegroup.com, join us this evening. Now, if you're listening to this after October 1st, it's not too late. You can still join as a member of Fully Alive Group, and you get access to the previous sessions that we have. We record each one, and you can listen to our teaching on marriage communication. You can be part of our question and answer sessions. Throughout the month of October, we're having some very special guests, Gary Thomas, Matt and Carrie Perkins. We're talking about sex in marriage, some great stuff. So fullyalivegroup.com, I would love to see you there. And I can't end this podcast without inviting you again to our live event coming up October 26th in Austin, Texas. Change Conference 2019. Last year's Change Conference was great. This year's is going to be even more exciting. Do check out the link in this week's show notes if you want to find out more. That live event is coming up on October 26th, and I would love to see you there. All around experiencing mental health and emotional wellness as God intended. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast family. I love connecting with you each week in this way, and I'd love to hear from you. On our website, drcarolministries.com, you can leave me a confidential message at any time. Would love to hear from you, and until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.